Welcome everyone back to the Say More podcast. I'm Sarah Ozycz, your host. Really happy to be here today again with another fantastic guest. I'm really happy to welcome Risa Cohen. Risa, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you doing this, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Of course. Really looking forward to today's topic. And before we jump in, I will just share that I've actually known Risa for the last 13 years. We used to work together in the behavioral health space. And so it's really an honor to have her on the podcast today.
And it's an honor to be here. It is.
So Risa, I would love to have you share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself so they can get to know you.
Sure. My name is Risa, and I'm a retired registered nurse who did a lot in my career. However, in the last part of my career, was truly dedicated to medical management of addiction. And I got to work with Sarah, who did the behavioral health part, because, as you know, addiction, which is what I'd love to talk about today, a very misunderstood disease. Addiction is something that you need a team for. Not one person can do everything.
And it's a great point, and it's something that I'm really proud of in terms of talking about on the podcast. And I've said this before too in my previous episodes, but every person's treatment pathway is different, and it requires a support group. It can't exist in isolation, and so really happy that you're going to be touching on some of those points today. Yeah,
I'm very happy to.
yeah.
I'm very happy to. Yes.
So one of the first questions that I'd like to ask all of my guests is, what mental health means to you. Part of the reason why I ask about this question is because my podcast is focused on destigmatizing behavioral health. And we can't destigmatize something without talking about it. And so it really matters what people are sharing about that topic. So for you, what does mental health mean?
It means everything, because I don't think there's a difference between mental health and physical health. It's all one category. One affects the other. And there's no reason why one can be talked about all the time, physical health, and why the part of mental health, which is your brain, which is also physical health, should not be talked about. It's very important. And somehow along the way, people stopped talking about mental health. And people who were suffering with issues kept it quiet. And I'm proud to say that that is changing.
Mm-hmm. It's changing with not only kind of our cultural response to mental health, but also having people like you on platforms like this, where we can speak openly and genuinely and honestly about kind of difficult conversations so that we can reduce some of that shame, we can reduce some of that stigma, because that's really the ultimate goal, right? We can't make progress without being the change ourselves. So this is
great. Exactly. So mental health issues become a brain disease, just like when you have a heart disease. If you took a picture of your heart, you could see the physical changes. Well, the same is true of the brain. You can see the physical changes in the brain, whether it's scanned or whether it's a CAT scan or an MRI. You can actually see that the brain changes. So it's as much a physical disease as it is a mental, that it shouldn't be taken apart that way. It shouldn't be separated. That's how I feel about that.
Why do you think that there has been such a separation, between kind of mental health and physical health? Why do you think that occurred?
I don't know, but it did. It really did, and I can understand why. People are ashamed because people think that they can change it themselves without help. So that's something you can change. So let's not go to the doctor for that.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually, so I'm on Instagram, and one of my posts most recently was around, I said, this is a radical idea that mental health is health and it is not a moral failing.
right. It's a brain disease, and addiction is very much a physical brain disease.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll jump into that too, which I'm so happy to have you on really as an expert in this field. So I would love for you to share with our audience a little bit about your pathway and your career as a nurse. I think that's really important for our listeners to understand kind of your background, your experience, and your expertise.
So when I became a nurse, which was later in life, I was a speech pathologist first, which I didn't enjoy as much as I wanted to get into more of a medical field. And so I went to nursing school when my son was 12, and my family watched me evolve as they evolved. And what happened was my very first job was as being a healthcare coordinator in group homes for people who need support, people with both mental health issues, adults, and disabilities, cognitive disabilities. And I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. I found myself, and that job lasted quite a while. And I was also always very interested in women's health, so worked in that for a while. I worked in family planning, which is also near and dear to my heart. Um, and one day I went on an interview to work as a nurse in addiction. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that much about it at the time. Like most people, I had a lot of misunderstandings. And when I was being interviewed, the person that interviewed me said, I see you have a lot of professional experience, but I don't see any experience with addiction, specifically drug addiction. And I said to her, well, I did a lot of drugs. And she said, you're hired.
I love that.
So that was my answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I started out working in a detox, and I was the health and safety nurse. But mostly what I did was check the first aid kit, replenish the band aids. But then I moved up to teaching the CPR, and then I was in charge of the AED machine, teaching how to use it, and making sure it was always available, because unfortunately we did need it in detox. And then I got into medical management and aftercare. And I learned a lot about medications for aftercare, after detox. Because just because somebody successfully detoxes, that doesn't mean that they're cured of this brain disease of addiction. And then I was a Suboxone nurse for a while, which is buprenorphine. Suboxone is a partial opioid agonist, which means you're getting some opioid satisfaction in your brain without getting high. And then I moved on to the brand name is Vivitrol. It's a full opioid antagonist. So it's an injection that people get every 28 days to block cravings for opioids. Some people take it for alcohol. It doesn't work as well for alcohol, but it does work well for opioids. But for some people, it works for the alcohol, which is something I can talk about. You know, alcohol addiction and opioid addiction and food addiction and smoking addiction. It's all the same in that it affects the prefrontal cortex of your brain. But you don't really die of food addiction. And that's the difference. That's the difference.
So you mentioned Vivitrol, Risa. So I will just share with our listeners that that's really how we ended up meeting.
Yes.
I had started out in an outpatient behavioral health clinical setting as a therapist, and I met Risa. She was the medication assisted treatment nurse manager. Did I get that title right, Risa?
Yes. Yes.
And so
Yes.
what was happening was I was facilitating several substance use focused group therapy sessions. And we would see primarily folks with a substance use disorder diagnosis, oftentimes with multiple diagnoses. So not only substance use, but also a mental health diagnoses.
And we shared patients as a team.
We did. And I
Yes.
think that's what made our relationship so successful professionally was because we really collaborated together as a unit to help support these people that needed treatment.
It was crucial. It was crucial. And the scary thing about being on Vivitrol is it's a great thing because it blocks cravings for opioids. However, you have to be very, very careful about who you give it to because they cannot do opioids while they're on it or prior to going on it. So they need to be at least 2 weeks opiate free before they get the injection. And we learn the hard way how to detect, to the best of our knowledge, if someone is being honest with us. A lot of people went on Vivitrol to please their families and didn't really think it through clearly. When I started working in this field, we were giving the Vivitrol to people who were under 18 in some cases, and the maturity wasn't there, and we learned the hard way that that you have to be mature enough to realize that there are going to be repercussions if you take this medication. But I think we should back up a little bit. I
Mm-hmm.
really do. I think we should talk about, since we're talking so much about opioid addiction, I think we should back up a little bit. There is such a misunderstanding about the addiction for opioids. The first time someone takes an opioid is very often because their doctor gives it to them. And for people who have a potential for their brains to have an addiction, go on this opioid and they stay on it to relieve their pain. And then their doctor will refill it for them once or twice. And then the doctor says, I really don't think I should refill this. I can't. And so the most responsible people decide that they're going to try to get it elsewhere because the prefrontal cortex of their brain is screaming at them to fill it. And so they go to the street and they buy the opioids, whether it be oxycodone, oxycontin. They don't run to heroin. That's not what happens as a rule. And then when that gets too expensive, when they're building up a tolerance for the drug, when they need the drug more and more, not to get high, but just to feel not sick, to feel better, that's when they run into trouble. And that's when it can affect all aspects of their lives. I've had loved ones of patients of ours, and I've had mothers and husbands and children say, why can't they just stop? Tell them to just stop. I say to them, do you ever get in the mood to have a piece of chocolate? And you say, well, I really shouldn't have that chocolate. I really shouldn't have it. But maybe I'll just have one. And you have that piece of chocolate and then you go about your day. but that chocolate is finished and it was such a good feeling in your mouth and in your brain that you go back and get another, and sometimes still another. Well, I tell that to people, and they say, well, you can't compare. It's not going to kill me. But I want them to understand, if you can't control not having that second piece of chocolate, multiply that by gazillions. And that's the feeling that their brain is screaming at them to use. So that's what I try to tell people. And then what happens after people are using just to feel better, they meet someone who says to them, you know, heroin is so much cheaper. As long as you just snort it and you don't inject it, you'll be fine. So the most responsible people end up doing that. And then someone someday says to them, you know, I can't even tell you the comparison between shooting up. Just be careful, use clean needles, shoot up, and that way you don't have to use as much and you'll get the same satisfaction. And by then their life is going topsy-turvy and it's affecting the people around them and it's affecting their jobs. They've gone to numerous doctors to try to get more, to no avail. So that's when they're in trouble. And that's when they start to lose control totally of
Mm-hmm.
their lives.
Mm-hmm.
The most well-meaning, responsible people. And that it becomes a brain disease.
Mm-hmm. And that's I'm very grateful that you were able to break that down for our listeners, because I do think that part of stigma and shame is not understanding or not being educated about the process and the disease of addiction. And something that I've talked about with some of my guests in previous episodes was that, this isn't something that happened overnight.
Correct.
For them, this was a buildup of decisions, thoughts, actions, physical, with dependence, that kind of led to the point of addiction. And we need to break down the stigma around, well, people just wake up and they can control it, and they just have to say no, they have to stop. But that's not really realistic.
Right. Right. We're all human. We're all human. We're all so fragile,
Yeah.
really. And that's where medication management comes in. So people go through detox. Sometimes they end up on a methadone program, which is an opioid agonist. So you're getting the satisfaction of feeding the opioid receptors in your brain without getting the high. And usually methadone involves going every single day to get your dose of methadone, checking in with the nurse, checking in with group therapy, and with people like you, Sarah. And then they can move on to
Mm-hmm.
something called Suboxone, which I mentioned before, which is buprenorphine, a partial opioid agonist. And that can satisfy some cravings, but you can still use while you're on Suboxone and you won't get sick. But the thing about Vivitrol is, if you use when you're on Vivitrol, and there's a lot of information about it if people want to know more about what Vivitrol is, but the providers have to be very, very cautious that this person is reliable enough to not use when they're, and when I say use, I mean take opioids in any form,
Mm-hmm.
because they can get very sick.
And so, for someone who were to come to see you, let's say for Vivitrol, you would need to be very confident that this person was ready to make this dedication in their life to start this treatment for their substance use disorder.
Thus, a part of the team effort.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
And part of, I think, the part of the team effort, I think, Risa, was also getting a complete picture of this patient or this client. So understanding both the substance use side and the behavioral health side as well.
right, right.
Could you share a little bit with our listeners, from your perspective and your experience in the field, how mental health impacts substance use disorders or vice versa?
I'm glad you asked that, Sarah, because it really is everything. It really is everything because the parts of your life that are healthy, the parts of your life that you're going to work and feeling like you have accomplished something, or going to school and feeling like you've accomplished something, or being an active, loving family member. All those things go on hold. Having friends, having recreational activities, people who are in the throes of addiction tend to be alone a lot, or their buddies are the people who are using as well. So it not only changes your life, but it changes your way of thinking. It's a disease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And that's why so important. It's so important for, I think, for patients or clients to really be very truthful and honest with their healthcare providers, so that we can really treat and assess really the root of kind of what's going on and the severity of what's happening in their life. Right.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. And if they have other complications in their lives going on, besides the illness of addiction, then it just complicates things. And that's where, again, where the team players come in.
Mm-hmm.
Just certain people have more access to care than others.
Yes. And that impacts outcomes as well, right? So
Right,
who is even walking in the door for treatment? How did they get to that particular clinic or that particular healthcare provider?
right,
What is their baseline understanding or baseline functioning, right? In our communities, do they have transportation? Do they have a reliable support network? These are all variables.
right. And everyone is different. Everyone is an individual. And that's why we really, when someone's in detox, we really stress aftercare because it's just the beginning. And we welcome people back to detox over and over and over again, numerous times, because you never should stop trying.
So, Lisa, can we talk about that a little bit more? I'd love to get your perspective on, people who seek treatment multiple times. Is that something that you would see often for folks
Yes,
presenting into withdrawal management or detox level of care?
yes, yes. You shouldn't have to get to know your detox patients well, but you do. You do. And each time you see them, you try just as hard as the first time you've ever met them because they say that relapse is a part of your sobriety journey. And it is. It is. It just happens, whether we're talking about alcohol or whether we're talking about opioids. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our response as healthcare providers, or in my case, a clinician, right, is to meet the patient or the client where they're at in their journey and to help support them now.
Right. In this space and time. Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
I think that
Yes.
the importance of the medical team, right, the behavioral health, the substance use, the medical side of things is that we don't give up. We never stop trying because you never know when it could be that person's window or opportunity to make the change.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
One of the questions I had for you, Risa, is are there any mental health or behavioral health trends that you would notice amongst patients who were seeking medications for their substance use disorder? And if you could talk a little bit about that.
I would say determination would be the answer to that. When they walk in the door, they are determined to not go backward. And especially when we're talking about getting the Vivitrol injection every 28 days. And for the most part, people are returning every 28 days. They are testing negative for opioids, and a lot of them are doing well. A lot of them are doing well. You know, I think some of the myths are that family members might be very concerned that they've been on these medications too long. So, when are they going to be able to get off them? Is a common question. And right now, things are going well for them. So you should not go off it. That's when we get into trouble. When people stop their Suboxone, I see it all I see it. I'm seeing it with a friend's son right now. He stopped his Suboxone. His family wanted him to, and he ended up relapsing terribly, terribly. And that's after 9 years of sobriety
Oh,
and
wow.
success. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It
So,
reminds me, it reminds me of also what we would see clinically on the behavioral health side, right? Is people who have either serious or persistent mental illness, they have an acute diagnosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, that's unmanageable without medication. They start taking medication um, as prescribed by a medical prescriber, a psychiatrist, a physician.
feel better
They feel better, and
because
then what
they're on
happens?
the medication
What
and
happens?
they say, I don't need it anymore. Right?
And and they stop their medications.
Right.
Yeah.
Or with depression, the
Yes.
medication is working for their depression, which is also a physical brain disease. The medication is working for their depression. I don't feel depressed anymore. I think I'm going to go off my medication. I don't
Yes.
need it anymore. So, yes, I think that's a myth that
Mhm.
you're on a supportive medication too long. Certainly, as opposed to the other side of things, to going back to old habits and old cravings.
One of the pieces also that I wanted to touch on, Risa, was the idea or the concept of harm reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And what your perspective is on that in terms of people who use substances. How might, let's say, something like a medication for their substance use disorder fall into the category of harm reduction?
Well, for instance, methadone is an opioid agonist, so it works in the brain like an opioid. So people might think, that's not good to be on that, but it's harm reduction. It's certainly better to be on that path than to be using heroin. These days, a lot of the heroin is cut with something called fentanyl. Fentanyl is used in hospitals very successfully under medical management and supervision. Anesthesiologists are overseeing its use. It is a very, very powerful drug. And we had people check into detox who did not even test positive for heroin, but they did test positive for fentanyl. And fentanyl use increases the likelihood of overdose and death. Very dangerous times.
We've also seen many reports and articles about health disparities and racial disparities in the community of people who use substances, and the rate of overdose and death, disproportionately affecting people of color, the BIPOC community. And I wonder if you had any response to that as well, just from kind of your lens and expertise.
Not having as much access to healthcare, not being paid as much close attention by healthcare workers in emergency rooms sometimes, not having access to insurance. It goes on and on. It goes on and on. But I think that's where it reminds me of using terms that are unacceptable and devalue patients in addiction as well, like judging somebody, prejudging somebody by the way they look. And even healthcare workers who know better can make that mistake sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the patient is going to suffer because of it. Terminology and language is important too, I think. I always say the word devaluing because when someone walks into any healthcare setting, they're at their most vulnerable, be it detox or anything else. And our job is to value them and the importance of helping them. And by using terms like bum or drunk or low life is just not acceptable. And it is very devaluing to
And
people.
Risa, it's also dehumanizing, right?
It
I mean,
is very much so.
I think about, how people separate themselves from others. And one of the ways is to dehumanize them, as you're saying, to devalue them, to take away their essence of being human. So whether that's, name calling, stereotyping, uh, you know, racial profiling, whatever it might be, to create distance. And okay, that problem is over there. That doesn't affect me.
Right.
But that could not be more wrong.
Could not be more wrong. It could not, it couldn't be. Everyone is vulnerable. Everyone has a tendency to have weaknesses in their lives. Since I retired, when I was working, I never really thought about drinking alcohol much. And since I'm retired, 4:30 or 5 o'clock comes, and there was a while there that I was saying, well, it's cocktail hour. Being a detox nurse aside. And fairly recently, my husband and I have put our heads together and said, let's take a walk at 5 o'clock. Let's go out with the dog at 5 o'clock. Let's go play pickleball. Let's not have that cocktail every single night because it gets to be a habit like anything else.
And it can sneak up quickly, right? Especially if you might be someone who is genetically predisposed to addiction. Let's say that addiction runs in your family, mental health or mental illness might run in your family. You're kind of already starting off behind, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I had to say to myself, wow, do as I say, not as I do, and kind of kick myself and say, and alcohol addiction is nothing to laugh at, as you know. When you're in detox for opioids, you feel like dying, but you do not die from detoxing from opioids. On the other hand, if you're detoxing from alcohol, there's a very high likelihood that you could have terrible seizure and it could kill you. So in many cases, the alcohol is just as scary and in some cases even more. It's just legal. That's all. So there's no, everyone drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the trends that I saw. So in my previous role, we would take a look at kind of macro level data
Yep.
across the state, and it would break down. We would drill down by diagnoses, and we noticed over the course of 4 or 5 years that people with a diagnosis of alcohol use disorder were entering detox level of care at almost double the rate than their counterparts who had a diagnosis of opioid use disorder.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that, but I truly believe that.
And this
You
cohort also would utilize the emergency room both before the detox and after they discharged at double the rate
That is
as
so
their opioid.
interesting, Sarah. That
Yes.
really is. Yeah. Yeah.
And so my point in saying that is that, alcohol use disorder has not gone away. It's always been there. But something has shifted since the pandemic that we've seen through data that supports the idea that people who use alcohol are really struggling and they're utilizing the treatment system much more than folks who have an opioid use disorder. And that could be a whole separate episode, I think, about
Right.
why that might be.
Why that happens. Right. Right.
Access to medication assisted treatment, regulations at the federal level, the state.
Right.
There's many
Right.
reasons. Also, with alcohol being very socially acceptable, right, compared to heroin
Of
use,
course. Of
use,
course. Right.
um, but that we can't forget about those people too. That they need, they need support. We need to help them. We need to reach out, offer, education, harm reduction, all of the things, right?
Yes. 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 For sure. For sure. And I don't think that stigma of using heroin will ever go away. That stigma that people have about it. But hopefully people will become a little more educated. But the most important thing to know is it is a disease, and it's a physical disease in your brain. And the first time, you don't think I'm going to be addicted. And it just goes on, and it doesn't go away.
It can very easily lead to that. And I
Yeah.
think that's I'm really glad that you're talking about this because, one of the questions that I had thought about for this episode is, what kind of myths can we debunk, dispel about both substance use disorders and the disease of addiction? And, you've talked about a couple in this episode already, but are there any additional myths or stereotypes that you really want people to know are not correct or that are not accurate?
Well, yes, just getting off, just by going off your medication management is not something that is wise unless it's done gradually with supervision.
Do you find that family members have this idea that people can just kind of cold turkey their medications and they will be fine? They will not have, a return to use, like they're good. Do you find that that's very common in this space?
I do, but everyone is different. Every single person we meet has such a different story. And some people have very supportive, enlightened family members. And those are the people that do better. They do much better than hiding medication management from their family, when they can share in it. A lot of family members are very frustrated because remember, this can go on for years and years.
Or
And
decades in some cases.
decades, decades. And family members are afraid that their loved ones are going to die. And they'll do anything to not let that happen. You don't want to have regrets. So you do everything possible that you can for people that you love.
So that was, yeah, that was one of my questions for you, Risa. Is, you are retired, but are you still staying kind of active in the space? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, when I'm not actively playing mahjong or pickleball, I am available to answer any questions and to help others. For sure. For sure. I've kept in touch with a lot of my peers, and a lot of them are still working in the field. So I do not hesitate to contact them if I want to connect somebody to them. And like I always say, I have an email address. Anyone can get in touch with me. It's Risa, RISACRN, at gmail.com.
Thank you for sharing that, Risa. Risa is the woman that will support you and be there for you and connect you with whoever can help you and support you in the way that you need. She is truly one of the best people that I know.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel the same about you for sure. I'm so impressed with you that you're doing this.
Thank you, Risa. So
Yeah,
kind.
and then being a mom and a wife at the same time.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's great.
It
It's
is. It is. There's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, it's very meaningful work though, and for me that feels, I'm sure, you have probably felt this in your nursing career as well, that the work is meaningful, the work is important, the work is rewarding. Not all the time it might not feel that way, but we know that we're making a
I
difference.
think so. I think so. Every day when I would leave with my dog to drop him off at doggy daycare on my way to work, I would say, "Come on, Eli, let's go save some lives." For sure.
So one of my last couple of questions I have for you, Risa, what would you tell someone going through a similar situation or who may know someone in your life that might be going through something similar? What would you share with them? What advice would you have for them?
You need a team behind you. You need a team around you. At this point, you need to rely on others to help you to overcome this. Like any illness, if someone has heart disease, you're going to send them to a cardiologist. They're not going to solve it themselves. And it's the same thing with the brain disease of addiction, for sure. We understand why it happened to you, and we'd love to help you overcome it. And a lot of people are available to help with that.
That's such a wonderful message. And I hope that our listeners also understand that there are so many people who find success in recovery, and that recovery is possible and it will change your life. I've had at least two guests on my podcast now with long-term sobriety, and their life is so much more joyful and purposeful. It's really incredible to witness and see the change that sobriety can give to someone. And
Right.
it's not possible, first of all, without that person deciding it's time to make a change, but also having the right team behind them to help them get there.
Including meetings,
Yeah.
including going to meetings. And if you
Yes.
need to go, and every day, stopping in on a meeting every day.
Yeah. We would say oftentimes in our groups, we would say 90 and 90, right? So do 90 meetings in 90 days.
Right,
You're first getting into sobriety, and that network of people has your back, right? And
right.
I would say meetings are not for everyone, fully acknowledging that, but for a lot of people, they can be a huge support in their journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you yourself are very knowledgeable, Sarah, and I'm so proud of you
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
doing
Yeah,
this.
it's mental health is my career. It's my passion. I will never get sick of talking about it. And I'm just so glad that we have a platform here to amplify the voices in this field and to amplify the message that we are all human and we have nothing to be ashamed of for being human.
Right. Exactly.
My last question is, what do you hope listeners walk away with from our conversation today?
I hope that they realize that everyone can be ignorant about a lot of things, and it's not their fault. And the more they learn about misconceptions about addiction and mental health, the better.
The better that our world will be, the better that our families will be, the better that humanity will be.
For
I think.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Great.
Yes. You say it well.
Thank you.
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I do try to be very thoughtful about the language that I use, and we talked about this earlier in your episode here today, where language really matters. Um, instead of saying this person with addiction, you might say this person struggling with an addiction.
Right. But person first. Did you notice that? The
Mm-hmm.
person comes first. It's
Mm-hmm.
an individual with addiction disorder. It's
Right.
not the addict,
Yes.
the
And
drunk.
right. And even a simple change like that is an act of destigmatizing behavioral health and addiction.
And
Right.
valuing individuals.
All right. Well, Risa, thank you so much for being a part of the Say More podcast. It was truly an honor to have you on today and to share your expertise and your knowledge in the field. I know that your story will have an impact on others, and I can't wait for them to listen. And hope to see you all next time in our next episode. Until then, stay well. Thanks, everyone.